Question number 6, Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Education. Is she satisfied that the introduction of partnership schools is resulting in better educational outcomes for all of the students who are attending them? If so, why?
Honourable Heke Parata.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
At the stage they're at, and in all the circumstances, yes. Mr Speaker, the schools have, however, completed just over 8 months of a first-year start-up. Nevertheless, the flexibility that the model provides is already showing some early positive results. For example, the latest reports from the Education Review Office on 2 of the 5 show signs of success, and we look forward to further reviews. I am satisfied that the partnership schools are meeting their contractual requirements and working to do the best for all their students. But of course, there will continue to be challenges, as there are in schools across our system.
Question.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If charter schools are supposed to be about increased flexibility, which of the following innovations does she believe will do the most to raise student achievement? Students making a bong to smoke marijuana out of apples supplied by the school, the incorporation of daily surfing into the curriculum, high staff turnover and lack of qualified teaching staff, and reports of bullying, racism and vandalism.
Honourable Heke Parata.
Mr Speaker, regrettably, every one of those examples given we have seen across our system of over 2,500 schools. It is not all right, and that is why we have levers in place to deal with them. And so we are dealing. But the flexibilities we're talking about are the hours of operation, the curriculum, the ability to have cashed up funding instead of it already paid on behalf of other schools, the range of subjects taught, the way in which they're taught, the engagement of parents, whānau, ainga and community. There are a whole range of flexibilities that these schools offer that we think will bring success for students who have not been successful for many years in other alternatives.
Supplementary question,
Chris Hipkins.
Why does she believe that these students are better served in an experimental charter school that is funded considerably higher than state schools, resulting in a ratio of 1 teacher to 8 students at that particular school, when existing schools could arguably do a much better job if provided with the same level of resourcing?
Mr Speaker, the member is quite wrong in his assertion. In fact, these schools are funded comparative to Decile 3 schools. The difference is that whereas in a mainstream state school, the ministry pays directly to providers, for instance, for property, for insurance premiums, for the provision of professional learning and development, those elements for partnership schools are cashed up. But the comparisons are almost exactly the same. And, Mr Speaker, to the first part of the member's question, no, none of these students are compelled to attend these schools. Their parents freely choose to do so.
Supplementary question.
Order. Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
How is it fair and equitable for a charter school to be funded, guaranteed funding every year for 71 students, when in fact they only enrolled 61 students at the beginning of the year? That number has already dropped to below 50, and the Ministry of Education figures show they're lucky to get 30 kids regularly showing up. That's half the number that they're funded for.
Order. Honourable Heke Parata.
Mr Speaker, perhaps if the member was more familiar with the way our entire education system runs, he would know that in start-up years for every school there is a projection of what that role might be, but it will fluctuate before it settles down. And that is equally true for very long established schools.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Thank you. Does she believe that charter schools conducting random searches of students to detect drugs or other prohibited items is consistent with the Education Act and the changes this government made last year, which prevent state schools from doing the same thing?
Honourable Heke Parata.
Mr Speaker, if the member has specific incidents or that he would like brought to my attention, I'm very happy to... And perhaps if the member would like to wait for my answer to his question, then I would be very happy to answer them. But what I can tell the member is that these schools are subject to review by ERO, 2 of which have returned a very positive review, and thank you to the member for celebrating that. 3 are still to come. In terms of their further monitoring, the Authorisation Board also does that. And thirdly, the Ministry of Education reviews and works with each and every one of these schools.
Question number 7, Alfred Narrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister for Social Development, what reports has she